Those two baits being our two for deep water. Next up is going to be our couple for shallow water. Yeah, if I'm going to stay shallow, I'm definitely thinking right off the bat, my numbers of bites may not be as good as they could be out offshore, but the size on average could be as good. It could be better if I get on the right type of pattern, this time of the year. Hey everybody, welcome back to this month's Pick 4. We are in the month of June and it is summertime at this point. Now some of you folks on up north, definitely still some fish spawning on places up there. I remember we fished a tournament on Cayuga in June one time and it was full-blown spawn. So I know that, a little further north that I'm a little bit early, but for a lot of the country down here, yeah, we are definitely looking at post-spawn. The fish are pretty much done. This is the time of the year when I see a pretty good split in our fish and what they decide to do. You've got the schools of fish that pull out offshore, that move out to those, those deeper water places. They group up, they'll spend their time there. But you also have fish that just, man, they're saying, I'm not going to do that. You'll see fish that definitely stay shallow all summer long, and it happens really early. There'll be, groups of fish that, that kind of set up residence. You'll hear that term a lot sometimes in the summer, throughout the summer, that you're catching resident fish that just end up staying shallow and choose to kind of live a little differently. The big schools of them, they go out, they stay together, they do their thing, but you'll have those groups of resident fish that, live in this creek arm or this bay or this section, whatever, that just decide to stay shallow for whatever reason. Part of that, before we dive into the baits, I think has to do with the bait fish. Those fish that typically stay shallow, those are more of your bluegill eaters. A lot of those fish that stay up shallow, they're keyed in on bluegill or maybe crawfish more. The ones that follow the schools of bait, schools of shad, is what I'm kind of thinking on the Tennessee River type system, not necessarily a herring fishery, but the ones that follow those schools of shad, those are the ones that move out offshore, they move out to deeper structure, and they're doing that because, well, that's where the bait fish are. So that's, that's kind of why they've done what they've done. But that's where you'll see a lot of that split. The shallow fish are keyed in on one type of bait fish. The fish out deep are keyed in on another type of bait fish. All right, so those fish that have moved out, deep this time of the year, I've got a couple baits here for those. I've got a couple baits for the fish that have kind of stayed shallow. Those fish that have moved out deep, a big key this time of the year, this isn't part of the Pick 4, but it's using your electronics, using those, whether it's side imaging, down imaging, your mapping, that type of stuff, to find those fish. That's the first key. If you don't find them, there's really no reason to ever stop and start fishing. So using your electronics to find them is number one. But my favorite way to catch those fish this time of the year, really going into picking that bait, is a crankbait. I mean, anything in that DT lineup that gets to the depth of wherever those fish are. If they're as shallow as 5 or 6 foot, from a DT 6, 8, 10, 14, 16, like this one, DT 20, whatever it takes to get to those fish, that's what I'm going to have tied on the end of that line. So, yeah, a crankbait is far and away my favorite way to catch those offshore fish. The reason for that, man, you get a reaction bite out of them. It's a way I can catch them quick, but I actually feel like I can trigger fish with a crankbait that I can't get to bite a lot of other baits. Just the speed I'm able to fish that, to keep it down there, to bounce it off of the bottom, bounce it off of any cover or structure down there, and can just trigger those bites. That's a big thing with me with that deep crankbait. Speed is such an important part of it. Last year, Parker and I were out fishing, and we had a big school of fish that we'd found on a DT10. These fish were in like 8 or 9 feet of water. And I had him standing there beside him, and I would keep telling him, like, crank it faster, buddy, crank it faster. And he would generate some bites, and he was catching some, but I was able to catch a fish most every cast strictly because of the speed of my retrieve. And he's throwing the same bait, standing right there beside of me, fishing as fast as he could, and he was catching a fish, every few throws. So the speed of that retrieve has a big part of how many bites that you're actually going to get. And it's just, like I said again, a reaction out of those fish is what you're trying to get from them. And a crankbait is the best way to do that on those offshore fish. But again, anything in that DT lineup that is anything that in that DT lineup that you're able to get to those fish in a shad type pattern, that green gizzard is certainly one of my absolute favorites that time of the year. Next up, you know, if you've worked a place over that's got a big school of fish on it, or those fish just seem to not want to chase, maybe they've been pressured or whatever, something that you can catch them on. I'm not much on dragging stuff. I would much rather just throw that crankbait, catch as many as I can, run to the next place. But if I'm trying to milk everything I can out of a school, my next bait, my next go-to is going to be a football jig. This is a great way to catch a really big fish this time of the year. Again, a fish that maybe not wanting to chase quite as much, or, you know, maybe you've got a lot of cover down there. A lot of our lakes in East Tennessee, it's rock or it's shale, it's clay. We don't fish a lot of brush piles this time of the year, but if I was fishing a lake that had a lot of brush, a football jig is going to be a go-to because it's something I'm able to fish in that brush pile, through that brush pile, and not get hung up, not have to worry about it. So this is the Terminator football jig, and just a brown coral color. And a twin tail trailer, a twin tail grub is something I like to have on that. That's a XPS twin tail grub, 5-inch, works really well on the back of that football jig. Just something that gives it a good profile. It's got a lot of action, a lot of movement. But a 3/4 ounce is my go-to. For the most part, this is going to be something I just drag along the bottom. I want to keep bottom contact with it. But I will on occasion hop this jig if I feel like those fish are, you know, maybe up off the bottom just a little bit. They're not seeing it dragging kind of underneath of them. I'll, you know, like stroke this jig up. I'll drag it along the waist and I'll hop it up off the bottom, try to jerk it 3 or 4 feet up off the bottom and let it fall back down. So multiple ways you can fish that football jig, but that Terminator football jig has kind of a unique shape to that head. That football head is kind of flat on the front. It really helps it to stand up really well when you're dragging it. So I think that is a good design feature of that football jig, is that flat football shape there on the front. Really helps that jig come through the rock well, but also stand up on the bottom a little bit. All right, shifting from those two baits being our two for deep water, next up is going to be our couple for shallow water. Yeah, if I'm going to stay shallow, I'm definitely thinking right off the bat, my numbers of bites may not be as good as they could be out offshore, but the size on average could be as good. It could be better if I get on the right type of pattern, you know, this time of the year. Something I definitely think of this time of the year are the bluegill starting to spawn. That's something that you'll see, you know, the shad spawn has probably wrapped up, but this is the time of year when those bluegill will begin to start their spawn. They took advantage of the bass when the bass were spawning. The bass are going to take advantage of them. It's time for them to return the favor on those bluegill when they start bedding. So if you get up shallow, you start seeing those craters around, put on those Costa sunglasses and look really good in that water, because you may see those bream up there moving around active on that bed. But what you'll notice, if you look well hard enough before you get right up on top of where those bluegill are spawning, it's out a lot of times on the deeper edge of those beds. You'll see some bass kind of wolf packing, kind of hanging around. Sometimes it'll be 1 or 2, sometimes it'll be 5 or 6, but they like to hang around where those bluegill are spawning. And I think they just kind of wait till they get hungry, or one of those bluegill acts weird or whatever, and they're going to take advantage of it. My favorite way to catch those fish around a bluegill bed is a topwater prop bait. This is a skitter wrap prop. This one's a frog color. I like this one. I like the one that has the chartreuse on it with that frog pattern as well. And on this one, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a Sharpie and I'll put some orange on the throat of it, and just whatever I can to doctor that up to make it look a little bit more like a bluegill. But this color, it's pretty good right out of the box. Yeah, they call it frog. I'm not really thinking frog when I'm using it. I'm thinking more of a bluegill type color, but this is a great way to catch them. This is, I'll be honest, this is the only time of the year in my part of the country where I use a prop bait. In the winter time, January, February, March, down in Florida, I'll use like the X-Wrap prop, but this is the only time of the year when I use a prop bait in this part of the world is when those bluegill are spawning and I'm trying to target those bass up there around them. But yeah, that's for that top water, month of June, look for bluegill beds, and that's a great place to throw that. Now, the last bait that I'm going to show here is just a worm, Bass Pro Shops worm. That is a very versatile bait, something you can Texas rig, you can Nico rig it and fish it out deep. I'll fish this on like a bigger shaky head as well. There's really no wrong way to rig this worm this time of the year, and this is something I've got so much confidence in. Yeah, once you get truly from the month of April or May throughout the rest of the year, I've always got a rod rigged with this Bass Pro Magnum Finesse worm on it. I've got green pumpkin and I've got sungill here. Both of these are outstanding colors, but my go-to setup for this is a 3/16 ounce tungsten weight, a 3/0 VMC heavy duty worm hook, and then I'm going to fish that on braided line with a fluorocarbon leader, usually like a 40 or 50 pound test braided line and a 17-pound test XPS fluorocarbon leader. But again, Texas rig is my favorite way to fish it. If I'm fishing it shallow around cover, if I'm fishing out a little bit deeper, I'm going to rig it on a VMC rugby head, like a 5/16 or a 3/8 ounce, and I can fish that out deep. Same places I'm fishing the crankbait or the jig, but rigged on that Texas rig, I can fish it around bluegill beds. I can pitch it into lay downs. I can pitch it into buck bushes. Just a very, very versatile worm. Doesn't have a lot of action to it, but it is bulky. It displaces a lot of water just given the size of it. And this time of the year, those fish like a pretty good meal. And this is just something that, man, I can't tell you how many fish I've caught on this and how much money that I've won on this worm throughout the year. But the month of June, this thing seems to really do a lot of work for me. So yeah, definitely try that very simple worm on a Texas rig. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with just how good it is. So again, thanks for watching this month's Pick 4. June can be a good month, but you can definitely see a separation in those fish from the ones that have moved out deep, have really grouped up. They're kind of all hanging with their buddies versus the kind of the more loner group that stays shallow. You'll pick up one here and one there, but at the end of the day, you could have a really good bag fishing that way. So hopefully these techniques will help you be successful on the water.